Good evening. I've always thought that there's only one thing worse than experiencing alcoholism itself, and that's being a beloved family member of somebody who's suffering from alcoholism and have to watch over the person as they destroy themselves, feeling helpless and powerless. Tonight I'm going to interview a very courageous lady by the name of Wendy, who lost her brother in tragic circumstances. I'd like this video to serve as a testament to his life, in that his story may help others. Also, Wendy for many years was a nurse on accident and emergency, and she's going to relay some of her experiences from that period of her life. So, welcome Wendy. I can see you're clutching a picture of your beloved brother tonight. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your story?
Okay, where to begin? My brother Jeff was 41 when he died, and he was my baby brother. He was 5 years younger than me, and so I'd had a lifetime of looking after him, really, as one of his two biggest sisters. And he'd suffered from probably mental health problems, I suppose, anxiety and depression from being a teenager.
Right.
And there were a number of reasons for that, and we only discovered very late on in his life that he'd become probably addicted to a number of things in his late teens, so he started experimenting with things and very quickly turned to alcohol and hid it for a number of years until he couldn't hide it any longer, really.
Right. So when you say until he couldn't hide it, what were your first inclinations of him? Drinking excessively?
Well, the last 10 years of his life, I knew that he had a drink problem, and I'd been to his GP a number of times myself to discuss it, and the GP wasn't willing or comfortable to agree that he had a drink problem. So we kind of skirted around it for a number of years, but we knew.
So you say the GP wasn't comfortable?
Well, I was going to the GP and saying, Jeff's got a problem, and the GP was saying, well, Jeff needs to come in.
Okay.
And even when Jeff had been in, and I would go back to see her, sometimes with Jeff, sometimes not with Jeff, she would say, he's got anxiety problems or depression.
Okay. So was Jeff in denial himself at that point? Right.
Yeah, for a long, long time. Up to probably about 18 months before he died, he was in denial.
Right, okay.
And really, until he was so poorly that he couldn't deny it anymore, really.
Right, so he actually denied it.
And yeah, he denied it to me, and he spoke to me and my husband, Mark, a lot about it. He loved my husband, and he got on really well with him, and they had a really good relationship. And my husband's a really straight talker and didn't mince his words. He's a Scouser, and he says it like it is. And it was him really that got Jeff to admit it. But when he admitted it, he said, it's my choice, and I feel better when I'm drinking.
Oh, right.
And I know what I'm doing, but I'm not going to give it up.
I can understand. I mean, obviously I've been through this myself, and I was lucky in the respect that I found a way out eventually.
Yeah.
But when he says, I feel better drinking, this is one of the things that we've addressed in the philosophy of optimal living. And really what happens, we know that when we imbibe alcohol, it goes to the frontal lobes of our brain. And this quells our inhibitions. In other words, it makes us uninhibited. It also affects our memory, it impairs our memory. So them two things combined are a very powerful seductive strategy, which means that we feel like we've alleviated our problems when in actual fact we don't care about our problems because of the effect on alcohol on our frontal lobe. So we can say, you know, I can identify with the way Jeff was feeling at that point.
Yeah, and he didn't know that, but he acknowledged that in our conversations. So he would say, when I drink, I don't feel so bad, and it makes me feel more confident. And he would never remember, and you know, the bad times I would remind him the next day, and
Yes.
that didn't help. At the time, I thought I was helping him, but it didn't help. It made things worse.
Right. I think also we talk about in the philosophy the pre-abreactive threshold and the post-abreactive threshold, and I can identify, as many thousands of people can, before we cross that line, so to speak, alcohol does seem to put the edge on life. Because it suppresses or represses our issues. It may be our self-esteem, low self-esteem, or how we feel about ourselves, or issues going on in our life, because it suppresses our memories of them, and we become uninhibited in that we don't care. It does give the illusion of giving us a better quality of life, but it is an illusion, and we know that them suppressed issues must surface at some point in time. Post-abreactive threshold, alcohol doesn't do that anymore.
No,
so,
and I recognised that as well, because he went through that, and then there was a time where he acknowledged that he didn't get that support from it, but that was the day, I suppose, that he woke up and said, now I need a drink at 6 in the morning to go back to sleep, to wake up at 10 to need another drink. And that was when he crossed that threshold, and he recognised that himself.
He did.
Very early, really,
Right. Going back before this, Wendy, you said, he was drinking from a very young age. How did you detect that there was something, that he was drinking maybe excessively? What was your first inclination of that, your first indication?
Well, it's funny. My husband said to me after he died, you will eventually see some humour in what's happened, but you can't see it yet. And I couldn't for many years. But now when I look back, I can laugh at some of these things. And there were some amusing things went on, although they weren't really funny, but they appeared to be. And so my husband had gone through a stage of doing homebrew. He loves learning new things, Mark, and at that time he was learning to brew wine and beer.
Right.
And we had, demijohns full of stuff in the shed, probably 20 or 30 demijohns. But my husband doesn't stick to his hobbies very long, so he made this wine and this beer, and it got left in the shed. And it was left there for years. Once he got bored and he moved on. And we'd never checked, and then suddenly when we did go to clear the shed out, there were demijohns empty with just bits of dregs in the bottom of the bottles. And we still didn't connect that it was Jeff at that time. And it was after he'd crossed that threshold and he was really ill. And he confided in me one day and said this started when I was about, 15 or 16.
Right.
And he'd been going in night after night, emptying these demijohns, but he was drinking full demijohns.
Right, okay.
So that was when I know it started, but I didn't see it at the time. The time I probably realised it was a really bad problem was him and his partner, they were still together then, had a baby, a little boy. And this boy now is about 16 or 17. And that first year of his life was very traumatic for both of them, because his delivery, his birth was really traumatic, and he nearly died, the baby. And my brother Jeff took it very personally, and he didn't ever get over what he saw in the labour room.
Right.
And reflecting on that, my brother was a very frail personality. He didn't cope well with any emotional turbulence.
Right.
And so he was almost like traumatic shock from the labour, really. And a year after the baby was born, when Mum got back on her feet again, they split up. And she didn't tell us at the time, she only told us later that they separated because of his drinking. And when they split up, he had a complete breakdown. And he just gave up on life completely, and things just went from bad to worse. So that was what, if his son is 16 now, that would have been 15 years ago, and that's when we started noticing that something wasn't quite right.
Right, okay. So the demijohns were being emptied.
Yeah, they were gone.
Right. And also, did you notice any difference in his personality?
Well, he was a very shy, inward, private lad, anyway. And he was born in that era. This sounds a bit mad, this, but he was born in the Thatcher years.
Right.
Or he was a young man in the Thatcher years.
Yeah.
And so as I left school and got a job and moved into a career, he was on that cusp that didn't. So he left school and became unemployed, couldn't get work, was in with a gang of boys that didn't get work. They all sat smoking and drinking all day and taking drugs or smoking dope. And so his mood had changed then anyway.
Right, I see.
And so when he started heavily drinking, his mood had already changed. So it was hard to say, is this the alcohol or is this the fact that he's been unemployed for so long, sat in his room as a loner? So it's all kind of, it's one big thing. It all happened together, really.
I see. Okay. So at the point when he first disclosed to you that he did have a problem, how did you feel?
Well, he I kind of made him disclose it.
Okay.
So he didn't come and say, he used to call me Wen. So when I've got a problem, it was months and months of me looking after him and picking up the pieces and saying to him, Jeff, you've got a problem. To then one day he said, I admit it, I've got a problem, but that was years down the line.
Right, okay.
So he was very debilitated by the time he faced up to it and admitted that he had a drink problem.
Right.
And he was on the road to ruin already by then.
So how did you respond to this? He was in denial. You obviously knew there was a problem. Can you tell us what was going on inside you at the time? How you were acting?
Oh, it was awful, to be honest. When I look back now, I don't really know how I got through those years, and I don't know why I'm sane today. Maybe I was insane and now I'm sane again. I don't know. But I had a very late baby, so I was 36 and I had this very longed for baby. So there's a big 18-year gap between my two boys. And I tried very hard to get this child, prayed hard for him, and he came. And I was very ill in the pregnancy. And when he was about a month old, that's when my brother and his partner split up. And we had my nana living at home with my mum, who was very frail. And because I'm a nurse, I was looking after my nana. I was looking after my newborn baby. And I got a phone call one day from my brother in absolute tears saying, we called my nana Mother. So Mother's dying, she's on the floor, she's dying, you need to come round. And so I had a newborn baby and I flew round there with this newborn baby. Don't know how I got there safely. And ran in thinking Mother's dead. And Mother she'd had a stroke and she couldn't speak. And she was on the settee looking really anxious and perplexed. And Jeff was on the floor at my nana's feet crying, holding her hand and stroking her leg. And it was like, what the hell's going on? And that was the day I went, something's really wrong here. And it escalated very quickly into chaos after that. But that was the day when I went, something's really not right here.
Right.
And he was just so drunk, he just didn't know what he was doing.
No. Lots of people, I mean, one question I always get asked, and this is not a question I can really answer. I can speak to my own mother about it. They went through the same things with me, obviously, and we're going to do an interview together as well at some point in time. But one of the things I'm getting asked is, what can we do for these people? And I know what the answer is, but unfortunately it doesn't give a lot of hope to them people who are going through what you've gone through. And that mainly is to detach and get on with your own life as much as possible, but be available with love when it's needed. In other words, I know why people try to interfere with my drinking and why they used to shout at me and why they used to roar at me and whatever. I use that as an excuse to drink more. Wouldn't you drink if you had all this moan? And wouldn't you drink if you had all this hassle in your life? But when that stopped, and I remember, for me, my mum coming into my bedroom one day and she said, Paul, look, rather than shout, because my bed used to be full of empty bottles of vodka, and they were clinking every time I used to move around. And I used vodka because I thought it didn't smell, and it reeked actually.
It
reeked out of your
reek. I remember
pores.
that smell.
Well, she used to come in mainly of a morning, and she would shout at me, frustrated. She had every right to shout at me, But this morning she'd come in and she would do something really different about her demeanour. And she looked at me and she said, "Look, Paul, we love you very much." She said, "You can carry on drinking, that's your choice, but she said, we don't want you in the house while you're doing it." And then all of a sudden, my safety net felt like it being yanked away.
Yeah.
And I thought, now the ball's in my court. I had excuses before. And now it really hit home when she said that to me. Can you relay any experiences of things you said to Jeff?
There's a couple, and I don't. It's a bit of a different story to yours.
Of course.
I don't know where to start. It's such a mess, but I was entwined with my brother's life.
Okay.
And I thought I could rescue him.
Right.
So I spent probably at least 5 years holding him up.
Okay.
And I wasn't well myself, and I almost lost my job because of it. And I'm sure to this day people still judge me on how I was then.
When you say you weren't well yourself, was this as a result of the stress you were feeling to try and help your brother?
Well, it was two things. I had postnatal depression because I'd had such an awful pregnancy.
Right.
And I nearly lost my son very late in the pregnancy.
Okay.
So, and after I delivered, I was very, very ill. I had a respiratory arrest myself and was very poorly. So I was recovering from that.
Okay.
And I had a newborn baby that had needed me. And then on top of that, the stress of my brother and the stress of the family, really, because it was left to me to look after him.
Right.
Because my mum and dad couldn't cope with him anymore. They just didn't know what else to do. So it was, well, you're a nurse, you can deal with it. So my family was breaking down. My husband is a saint, and I can never thank him enough for what he did, but the strain it put between us was terrific, and he never let me down, but he could have easily walked away at any time. But in terms of letting go of Jeff so that he could make his own mind up, I didn't feel I could at that time.
No.
And I was terrified of letting go of him and he would die.
Right.
And so for years I picked up the pieces and looked after him and nursed him and protected him and sheltered him and overprotected him when I shouldn't have done. But when you're in that situation, you can't not do it. You're stuck.
I think
you're in a feedback loop.
I think this is a very natural thing to do as a family, a close family member. I know exactly the same thing happened with my mum. I was at home at the time, and she done all the things you're talking about with me. She tried everything to help me. Yeah.
I can't tell you the thing. There's so many things I did. Things I did that damaged me. And
can you?
Well, so I ended up going for counselling because I couldn't cope with anything anymore. I did cope. I was a robot, but I wasn't really functioning.
Yeah.
And my brother had been assaulted due to his alcohol abuse. He got into a risky situation, and he got pounded really, and he was left quite poorly. And he was in a council flat in a very vulnerable estate, full of really aggressive people, and they broke into his flat and battered him, left him for dead. And I went to the council, and I was like a raving lunatic in the council. I can still see in my mind's eye all these staff at the council stood looking at me, not knowing what to do, and I was screaming. And it's not, people who know me, it's not my nature to be that way, but I made a holy show of myself, and I threatened them with everything. And I said, you get my brother out of there, if he dies I'll sue you, I'll slam your names across the papers, I'll bring it up in the highest place, I'll go to the local chief exec of the council, I'll bring the police in, I'll sue you. Get him out of that council flat. You've left him in a vulnerable position. He's a vulnerable adult. Blamed the council really, but I made a holy show of myself. Yeah. And that day I went to my GP and said, I need help. because I knew I was going to go escalate and go worse.
Yes. Yeah.
And I went for counselling, and I had cognitive behavioural therapy, and the therapist said to me, she talked about you having a signature of this is what to look for before you blow. And she helped me to understand when you get these feelings are telling you that you're about to lose control. And so I had to practice self-control for a long time so that I could keep him safe. But those people in the council, I was a commissioner at the time in the NHS, and I had to deal with them on a work basis professionally. And I risked my reputation and I risked my livelihood trying to help my brother, and went to work and functioned like a robot and must have made some not great decisions.
It
really.
seemed like it absolutely consumed your
It
life.
did,
The
it did,
attention you were
it
giving
did.
to your brother consumed
Yeah.
your life, which is a very, very common story.
Yeah, but harking back to what you said about the day that your mum said to you, it's up to you. I had 3 experiences. So the first one was that my dad, who I absolutely adore, and he's a good role model to me and has been all my life, couldn't cope with him anymore. And my dad said to me one day, if anything happens to me and your mum, you won't see him in the gutter, will you? And because my dad said that to me, I couldn't see my brother in the gutter. So I couldn't let go from my dad, and I didn't for years. And then many years later, when he was really bad and I took as much as I could take, I remember being at the door of his flat and saying to him, that's it, Jeff, you're not trying, you don't want to get better, so I'm not bringing my son and your son to this flat where it's dangerous, where there's dangerous people around to see you. You want access to your son, you make arrangements with his mum from now on, because you're drunk again.
Yeah.
And the boy can't see you like this, so I'm walking away, and you're not seeing me till I hear from you that you're making the effort. And he stood on his doorstep and he shook his head and he said to me, so you're abandoning me?
Right,
And
okay.
I really felt that, and I did abandon him for a couple of weeks, but then we got back, and because I knew there was a pattern to his drinking as well.
I think also from our side of it, from the drinker's side of it, we're very, very good at making other people feel guilty.
Yeah, and he did.
You know, we blame everybody
he did.
bar ourselves. So,
and that stuck with me, that. But then, and this is the hardest thing, and I don't really know if I've recovered from it, to be honest. I think I have, but if I dig too deep, it still hurts a lot. And he'd been about 18 months before he died, after this assault, he had a brain injury and it was unrecognised, and he was really ill, and he cut me off for 3 weeks and I couldn't get to him. And after 3 weeks, this day I woke up, because I'm quite intuitive, and I woke up and I thought, oh, I need to see him today, this is dangerous. So I didn't go to work, I drove to his flat and knocked and knocked and knocked till he answered the door, and this old man, bent double, shuffled to the door. I could see him through the glass, and he was unshaven and he was stooped, he was literally bent like an old man, and he didn't recognise me, and I had to coax him to let me in. And eventually he the fog cleared and he said, oh, it's you, when you come in. And I got into the flat, and as he walked down the corridor into his living room, he kept falling over and really hitting the floor hard. And because I'm a nurse, I knew something was wrong. Mm-hmm. And so he didn't have a phone, and I didn't have my phone with me at the time, and he collapsed on the floor, and I could tell he had no reflexes, and I could tell it was a brain injury. So I had to go next door in a dangerous situation with these quite dangerous people and beg really to use a phone. And I phoned for an ambulance, and I got my sister to come, and she came with her husband, and I couldn't tell my husband because he didn't know where I was, and he wouldn't have been pleased because he was at the end of his tether, and he was with I had a child as well. And so the ambulance came, we took him to A&E, and we sat there all day, and that evening, and he stunk and he looked like a tramp, and I kept begging them and saying, please, will you see him now? This is urgent. and they wouldn't see him because they were busy. And when they eventually saw him, the junior doctor saw him, and of course I'm used to dealing with junior doctors. I know that locums, junior house officers come in and they're learning on the job. And so I was saying to her, look at his reflexes, he's got no reflexes. And she stood him up and he fell over, and she said, well, he's drunk. And I said, he's not had a drink for at least 3 weeks, he's been housebound. And the attitude was, he's drunk, what do you want us to do? And eventually we convinced them to admit him for a scan. And they didn't scan him, they left him in bed. And the next day I rang up and I said, if he's not scanned in the next hour, I'm making a formal complaint. And he had his scan, and he had 2 massive hemorrhages in his brain. So they then rushed him to Walton, to the neuro centre, and he was in intensive care. And on the next morning they took him to theatre, and he had brain surgery, and he was never the same after. The reason I'm telling you this is that he then went into rehab for a year.
Right.
To recover. And when he came out, he'd been home a couple of weeks and he deteriorated again. And I'd gone to see him for his birthday, took my son, took his son. And when I got there, he was drunk. And because he had a brain injury as well, he couldn't get up off the floor. And he gave the kids some money and said, go to the shop for some chocolate. And when the kids left the flat, he said, I can't see you today, Wen, because I've had a drink and I'm too drunk for the kids to see me. And I just lost control and said, that's it, I'm finished with you. I mean it, Jeff, you've got to, nobody can do this for you. And basically I got up to walk out, and I said, I'm not coming back until you deal with this, and I'm taking the kids away. You're not seeing the kids anymore, because your son, the boy, is now of an age, he knows what's going on. And so we drove off, and Jeff never left the flat again, and 3 weeks later he was dead, and we found him dead on the floor. So me letting go of him, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I let go of him and he died.
Right, so at that point, how did you feel? Obviously you felt devastated, but what sort of things were you going through your head? Because from my perspective, listening to you, you've done what any loving member of the family would do. And as we've seen time and time again with different people, them efforts were always to no avail. And I know that through my own personal experience. So obviously that must have been devastating.
Well, just before he died, I was just in a mess. And I can remember being in the kitchen at work with a very close friend, crying and saying to her, he's going to die. And she was saying, don't be silly, he's not going to die, and you're doing the right thing. And he died. So I just felt this sense of complete loss of control and real guilt, because I knew I had to let go. I knew I had to. But the pain of letting go. So I had this metaphor in my head, and I used to say to my husband and to my friend, I feel like I've got his soul in my hands. I'm holding his soul for him till he can have it back. And I literally felt like I had this precious light in my hands. And then this day, metaphorically, I said, I've got to give him this light back. And the day I went to see him, in my mind, I did that and gave him his soul back and said, it's yours now. And it was heartbreaking. It was absolutely heartbreaking. I can't tell you. And after he died, I think I completely lost it. And it took me probably 3 years to get over it, to sleep, to not have nightmares and flashbacks, and to be at peace, and to look to the future and see a blue sky and rebuild my life, really. And I'm just very lucky that my husband never let go of me in that time.
Yeah. It seems like it has an awful impact on the extended or the wider family, doesn't it? Everybody gets sucked in, everybody gets consumed. It affects so many lives. But, you know, listening to you, Wendy, I think if I had somebody in that situation, I would probably do everything you've done. And again, I've met so many people, some with tragic stories like your own, others with happy endings. And yet one thing seems to be a common theme. It doesn't matter whether the family members run round after the people, lavish them with love, do everything for them, or disengage from them. The result is going to happen no matter what.
Absolutely right.
And it seems when people say to me, what can I do? On a logical sense, you want to say, well, you've got to detach as much as possible and try and get on with your own life. But on an emotional level, that must be almost impossible to do.
Yeah. It feels impossible when you're in it, but looking outside, looking back, I can see it really clearly now. And if I could give anybody any advice, it would be learn coping mechanisms for yourself.
Okay.
And understand yourself and understand what you're doing that's contributing to the situation, not helping it, even though you're doing that out of the best of intention. And it was the learning, really what I did with you on the course and other learning that I did, that helped me to see that. And I gained the insight and was paralysed and couldn't do anything. And then when I got strong enough to do it, he died. But I know now he would have died anyway.
Yes.
But I'll carry that guilt with me till the day I die. That'll never go away.
Right. Can I just ask, you were saying before, about learning coping mechanisms and skills. Can you give us some examples? If you were to go back, what them coping mechanisms and skills, what you would try to put in place? Have you got anything that might be of advantage to other people who are going through what you're going through?
I don't know that people would necessarily listen, because I listened but I didn't hear. And I think it's things like looking after yourself, taking time out, resting, getting sleep, being with your own family, not neglecting your own family, and protecting yourself from the damage that happens in that time. And that means things like, it might be reading, it might be poetry, it might be the gym, but you've got to have some bit of you that you fill. Really, that bit of you that needs the energy putting into, that makes you strong enough to cope with them. And for me, it was understanding that I was in a damaging relationship with him, so we were codependent.
Yes, yeah.
And
I was going to say then, when you said you've got to keep a bit of yourself, that almost sounds like you're intertwined to such a degree that there's no boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. So you blur, you become one. And I often said, and some of my close friends have said, he wasn't your brother, he was your baby. And he did become my child. So I had 3 children, plus his son, because I shared custody with his ex-partner. So I had 4 children. And he was my baby. And that, now I think that wasn't healthy, but at the time, I just have a natural inclination to care for people as a nurse.
Of course.
And I went into nurse mode and did that. So I think if you can do some work with carers and family, that helps them to understand interdependency in simple terms, and how they're creating this vicious circle, or at least the taking part in it unconsciously. If you can get them to understand that, at least you're opening a door for them, so that when they're strong enough, they can make that step.
Yes, yeah.
And I think the other thing is dealing with guilt. Really, dealing with guilt is a big, because the guilt kept me trapped. My dad saying don't have him in the gutter, and me believing that he was my baby brother and I couldn't not look after him, and the nurse in me saying clinically you can care for him. And I think he lasted as long as he did because clinically I nursed him as well.
Yeah. At this time, we were talking earlier on in the introduction as well, and you've mentioned quite a few times during the interview that you were a nurse at the time, obviously. Can you tell me how your personal life was impacting on your professional life at the time?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, I worked, although I'm a nurse, I went into management as well, so I had a dual job, dual role. So I did a job where I was a manager, a commissioner, so I bought nursing services for the local community, and I also did some clinical practice as well. And my commissioner job, well, I worked across 8 health authorities in the north, supported them with development, and I became at risk, as teams did then in the NHS because of the economy. And so I had a team of 5 or 6 staff working for me and had to place them across the northwest. So I placed them all in jobs, and then I didn't have a job, I was at risk, and I went to work for a well-known, very gregarious local executive, and he said to me a year after my brother died, "A year ago I wouldn't have given you a job because you weren't worth employing." And that summed up where I was at in work. And I can remember sitting at my desk, hiding my face because I'd been crying for 2 hours while I was emailing people, and feeling very on the edge all the time, and thinking if there's an emotional story or a patient that's got a bad journey, or if somebody dies, I don't know that I've got any more left to be a professional nurse and manage this because I'm exhausted. And there were certain staff around me that avoided me, and I think they thought I was a bit of a loony, but they didn't know the journey that I was going through at the time. And so the learning for me, I've took that back into my day job, and I use patient stories, and I use metaphors for patients. So I get our staff, when we're doing a piece of work, we will design a patient as a picture and say, if this was Jeff, what would Jeff do? What would Jeff want? So I've learned a lot from it, but I did myself a lot of damage.
Right.
In my personal life.
Okay. And this, Jeff died how long ago now?
I think it was 2010.
Right.
Yeah.
2010, so we're looking at about 5 years now, yeah. And how would you say the years since his death have been for you?
People have asked me that lots of times, because what happens in work is when word gets out that you've had this kind of an experience, all the families who've got secrets come and tell their secrets to you.
Yes, yeah.
So I now support a number of managers and nurses who've got alcoholics in the family.
Right.
So good, that's good. But they all say, oh, how awful, you must be really sad. And actually, 5 years on, I'm not. I'm quite relieved for me, and I've rebuilt a new life, and that's a life I would never have had if he was still here.
Right.
And I don't feel ashamed of that anymore, but I did for a long time. But what I recognise is that my family had to wait while I nursed my brother. So I'm now investing in my family and myself. So I'm doing my master's degree at the moment, and I could never have done that. I should have done it 10 years ago, and I couldn't because I was nursing Jeff. So I've reinvested in myself, but the first 3 years were hell. And if I could do anything, and the reason I'm doing this tonight is because if I can help one person not go through that hell that I went through, and I mean literally hell, then this is worth being honest about and talking about, because I think I went mentally ill. I used to wake in the night screaming and gasping for breath, and my husband would be shaking me, waking me up, saying it's just a dream, it's just a dream, and I would see his face in the morgue, and I heard him in my sleep. So I would wake up and I'd hear him talking to me, and I would really think he was in the room, and then I'd be hysterical, sobbing, and it hurts me today. And I would go shopping to Asda or Tesco, and I'd think, oh, there's a jug there for £2.50, I'll buy that for Jeff's flat. And then I'd go, oh, he's not here. Oh, there's tea bags are on offer, I'll buy me a box and I'll buy Jeff a box as well. Oh, hang on a minute, Jeff's not there. And you know, when we emptied his flat, my brother was a songwriter and a poet and a musician and an artist, very talented, wasted, and me and my sister split everything between the family. So my sister took all his art, and we packed all his chefing things away because he was a chef, and gave them to, well, we put them away for his son for when he's older. And I took his poetry and his music and all his CDs and his LPs, and I would find them lying around the house, and I would just be paralysed, and I would just be sat crying for 2 or 3 hours, and then I'd come to and think, well, where have I been? And I would just have a piece of his poetry in front of me, and eventually my husband had to take it all off me, which it wasn't easy. He kind of wrestled it off me, and he boxed it all up and put it in the attic. And we're just having an extension built at the moment. We've been up in the attic clearing, and I found it, and it all started again, and my husband had to remove it from me again. So it destroyed me, mentally, physically destroyed me.
And did you say this was for the first 3 years after his death?
Yeah.
And then what changed?
Because of the work that I'd done in the courses that I've attended with you.
So that would be the hypnotherapy courses, the
Yeah.
counselling courses, etc.
Yeah, and the Alchemist course that we did.
Of course, yeah.
All of that insight that I gained, I used every day.
Yes.
And little snippets of it in everything that I did. And then I did some coaching at work as well, and I learned to become an executive coach and a team coach, and so I was revisiting the stuff that we learned, or I learned from you,
Right.
in these courses, so it was reinforcing it with me.
Excellent.
And all of that stuff kept reminding me, and I just kept growing. But it's like it being in a pool of water or climbing a hill, and you take a step up, and then you take 2 steps back, and then another step up, and it was the strength to say, you can do this. And I don't know today where I got that strength from. I think it was probably spiritual, because I also have a strong faith. It's an alternative faith, but it's a very strong one, and that carried me through as well.
Right.
That
right.
belief in spirituality and you know, turning to with different faiths, really.
Okay. So about your faith, I mean, again, another pertinent point. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'm a Catholic, born and bred, and I'd already not turned away from it, but questioned it intensely before Jeff. And in Jeff's sobered days, we had lots of discussions about that, because he was questioning his faith as well. So we went on that journey together, and in that journey, I became a druid.
Right,
I suppose
okay.
is the best way of saying it.
Yeah.
And very earth-based, and that just nurtured me, kept me strong. I had a colleague, Barry, at work, who was very good to me after Jeff died, and he said to me, don't turn your face away from your faith, turn it towards it, and that's what I did. And just by opening myself up to my spirituality, I found more things that helped me, but I had to find them. Nobody could find them for me. It was about me doing it.
So what sort of things were they? Were they things that your spirituality can help you in a practical way? Oh.
It was things like meditation.
Right.
It was things like keeping diaries.
Yeah.
Learning to meditate, reading books, things like Eckhart Tolle's books, The Power of Now,
Yeah.
Living in the Moment, mindfulness, learning to love yourself and learning to let go of grief and loss. And I could only do that because I read avidly. So I would read a book and think, what does that mean to my grief? How does that help me? And then I would start practicing the things that I learned in the book. So The Power of Now was about living in the moment and letting go of pain. And what is pain?
Yeah.
How do you feel pain? How do you acknowledging pain instead of holding on to it? And then by acknowledging it, you let go of it.
And it's been lovely, Wendy, to see the way you've improved yourself. I mean, I seen you when you were going through
I know you
that
did,
stage
you
of your
did.
life, and you still come along to the courses, you
I did.
still went on the self-development route, even though you were struggling
Yeah.
on a personal level.
Yeah.
And let me perhaps end this interview by giving you some insight into perhaps the way your brother was, because I can also identify, and I've spoke to probably thousands of people who've drank who've done the same. Everybody around them, especially the closest people, become scapegoats.
Yeah.
And really what it is, it's shadow projection, you know, many times. It's just all of the frustration and all of the things that we don't like about ourselves. When we drink and we project onto the people around us, they're to blame. We don't accept any responsibility for our lives. We don't understand why it's happening to us. Therefore, we hit out at everybody around us. But let me say, I remember my mother and father doing everything that you've done for Jeff. Okay. And today I am exceptionally grateful for them, because it was that love, it was that care, it was that ultimately probably did keep me going.
Yeah,
Although
I think it did.
It was a double-edged sword in the fact that when I sobered up, I couldn't bear the guilt of the pain I'd put them through.
And I think I did that to my brother.
Yeah. But it's not a case, I don't think, of them doing it to you. That's just, I just think that is a case of a family showing genuine love, as you've shown genuine love to your brother. You know, you wanted to save your brother at any cost, but unfortunately, whether people or loved ones give that attention to the person who's suffering, let's put it that way, or going through alcoholism, whether they give them that attention or whether they detach from them, it always seems that the result, whatever that may be, is going to happen anyway. And I think it's probably important to mention to people out there is that as much as possible, it's good if you can get on to a certain degree with your own life, knowing that what you do, whether it is bathe the person in love or detach from them, but still let them know you love them, the results are nearly always going to be the same.
Yeah, and that's something that when you're going through it as a family member or a carer, you can't come to terms with that. And maybe it's because you've never experienced it, because you only get one, don't you? Hopefully, there's only one in your family, so you learn, and then it's done. But I think for me, I don't want anybody to see what I saw the day we found him and the day we went to see him in the morgue and what happened with the coroners. I want anybody can avoid that, and if by sharing this story we can do that, then that's one thing that we can help other people with, isn't it?
I think one thing that's really important to anybody is when people are drinking or when people are trying to support people who are drinking is identification. And people need to know that there's other people like them out there that are going through the same thing, and I think that's really important.
But I remember, Paul, hunting the internet down. Literally every night I'd be going through the search engines looking for self-help groups, help groups, chat rooms, web pages, and there is some stuff, or there was a little bit of stuff out there then, but nothing UK wide that was any use that followed through helpfully to me. And the only places that I got some solace was chat rooms that were American. So there were things like sibling websites and stuff like that, where people would go onto chat rooms and say, I've got a brother that's doing this, what do you do? Or my dad's got alcoholism, how do I cope? And so on. And I was really looking for other people that were in the same boat as me, who I could talk to online, because it was more anonymous, and say, I'm going through this, what have you done? Can anyone help me?
I think that is a real pertinent point, what you've just made there as well. I mean, there are groups, we know the groups such as Al-Anon in this country and whatever, but lots of people do want that anonymity and they don't want to be seen. And I think it's so important, which is one of the reasons that I'm building this new website, which we're going to launch later on this year in October 2015. And that goes also for the people a lot of people who are experiencing alcoholism also
they need
want to
it
keep
too.
that anonymity.
Yeah.
And I think if we can give a comprehensive, perhaps the biggest website in the UK, for helping people doing these type of interviews, then they've got a source they can go to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
That's important.
That's anonymous.
Because, you know, many times I would be in A&E at 2 in the morning, and would come home, my husband would be in bed minding the little one, and I would go online and start searching at 2 in the morning. It was no good to me at 3 in the afternoon. I wanted at 2 in the morning, somebody tell me this is okay. And the other thing that I really think would help people, I mean, I'm a nurse, so I see things very clinically anyway, but even if I wasn't a nurse, they have fits, don't they? They have constant fits when they're withdrawing. So being able to go online and say, not to anybody, but to somebody with a little bit of experience behind the website, you know, what do I do when he fits?
Yes. Yeah.
What's the safest way to manage him? So, for example, I didn't know at that time, even though I was a nurse, I wasn't specialist in alcoholism.
Yes.
So I would say to him, you come to mine on a Saturday to see the boy, his son, he'll be up at 11, come and see him, you be sober. And if he turned up at the door, my husband would say, go away, Jeff, you're drunk. So he would drink on a Friday night and be withdrawing on a Saturday. And he would arrive in a terrible state, and then he would fit. And then there'd be an ambulance, and then the child would see him in a distressed state, and the weekend would be ruined. Now, if I'd have understood what I was doing and how to manage his alcohol differently, I wouldn't have done that.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's hundreds of other sisters, wives, girlfriends, mothers doing that. How do you manage somebody that's stopping drinking just to see the child for the day?
Yes.
You know, if they fit, how do you put them in recovery position? How do you call an ambulance every time and spend 6 hours in A&E, or is there something you can do and put them to bed when they stop fitting to keep them safe?
Yeah.
So I taught my brother, lie on the floor when you're withdrawing. So we would go through a 2-week stage. When you know you're coming off the booze because the money's run out till you get your next gyro, lie on the floor and put pillows on the floor and lie on a sleeping bag and sleep there watching telly. Don't go to bed, because if you roll over in bed you'll suffocate and you'll die. So simple things like that, teaching those types of, instead of them being codependent, giving the carer some skills that are useful without over caring would be really helpful.
I think fitting is I can remember, well, I can't remember, I can remember the after effects of the worst fit I ever had. And what happened there is literally, I woke up and I thought somebody had hit me over the head with a hammer. I just felt like I'd been belted. And my mum and dad were saying, get out of bed, come on, we need to get you up, the ambulance is coming. And I was looking at them, I was thinking,
what?
Why is the ambulance coming? You know, what's happening? And apparently my whole body had been shaken, the whole bed had been shaken, there was froth coming out of my mouth. I was totally sort of gone, unconscious. And I remember what preceded that as well. You know, part of your stories brought back the horrors of my own. And I remember for perhaps a week before I had that fit, I had more or less a wet brain. I was seeing I was having terrible hallucinations. I was in my bedroom and I was seeing faces at the window. And I went to my mum and dad into their bedroom and I said, there's faces at my window. And not realising I was on the first floor. I thought there was World War III going on in the street. I could see people handcuffed in a pond in the garden opposite. And there was all fighting going on. And this went on. That's right. Before that as well, my sister was at home, and I seen gunmen as real as you're sitting there going into the bathroom, and I shimmied the wall, literally come down the wall, went into her bedroom and said, Barbie, you've got to get into my mum and dad's bedroom, there's gunmen in the back kitchen. And I was petrified myself, but it was as real as you're sitting there.
It is real, isn't it? For them, it's real.
But my only recollection of that was I was an entertainer at the time, and a week later I had a booking out to play on a club, and my dad reluctantly said he'd run me down there, he'd take me down there. And I said to my dad, isn't it funny that there was nothing in the papers, the local papers, about them riots in our streets? Then he said, Paul, it never happened. Now he'd said this to me all that week, and it never clicked.
Yeah.
And it was 1 week later that it clicked, and I thought, I could have just stayed in that. Many people stay in that sort of situation for life, wet brain, and they live an unreality, if you like, and it's so devastating. I mean, you've brought lots of things back for me tonight, Wendy. But I think on that note, I think we've covered. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we finish the interview?
I think there's a lot of people out there who think they're doing the right thing for the person that they're looking after, because they don't know what else to do. And if we can work with some of those people to enable them to be strong enough to let go safely and stand and be, as you say, give love but not over love or over shelter, I think that would be a great thing if we can do that.
That's excellent. On that note, Wendy, I'd really like to thank you for having the courage to come along tonight and share your experiences. And I would also, probably many people are going to see this video, see this recording. I would like to offer you an invitation to come to our seminar and take part in our seminar of basically the launch of the website, which is in October this year. And maybe people can come and talk to you on a one-to-one basis or as a group. So, you know, if you would accept that offer, I'd be really grateful.
Yeah, that would be good.
And on that note, I'd just like to conclude the interview. And as I said at the beginning of this, you know, it took a lot of courage for Wendy to come along here and share her strength and her experience. And also, let's not forget Jeff. We'd like this video to be a testament to him, in that the story that's just been relayed will go on to help many other people. Thanks, Wendy.